The Strange Bee by Timothy Boyer. It started as a small disturbance on the far edge of the meadow, against the background of the surrounding trees. Small flashes of blue and yellow, sometimes green and sometimes crimson, deep and rich. Bees quickly noticed these things, since they must always be aware of the shifting rays from the sun, and the turning of the earth in order to find their way out in the morning, and then home again at night. The worker bees were returning through the dusk in long black columns, weary and dry, carrying heavy loads. It was really just a nuisance. The life of the workers was not easy. They had only very little time at the end of the day to clean off the sticky dust and get ready for the new day. Flying off in the morning and cleaning off in the evening were only the real pleasures they ever had. They rested in cramped cells, warm but stark and uncomfortable. The call went out to alert the soldier bees, who mustered quickly. But they were reluctant to start a mission at this late hour, and since it was obviously only a single intruder bee, there really was no need to take any action tonight. They were off early the next morning and quickly located the alien, wet and cold in the morning dew, moving slowly and with difficulty from the night cold. This was obviously not a difficult challenger, but there would be at least some honor in stinging and killing the first of the intruders. However, as it happened, there was no one willing to expend the single sting allotted to each soldier bee on such a pathetic and helpless stranger. Also, there were no other disturbances in the rays of the sun. Apparently no one else was following. The conclusion was that a single bee had become damaged somehow and so lost direction. And so, as it happened, they left him to die, either in a storm or maybe on one of the cold nights of autumn. The new bee did not even bother to gather pollen or attempt to create honey. He just flittered about aimlessly, and so was eventually ignored. He only began to create a problem when it was noticed that several worker bees were taking some time out to watch the strange bee.
He doesn't like to make honey. He makes flowers.
The designers were beginning to get concerned. Obviously, production would fall off, the queen would be unhappy, and so they started to ask questions.
What do you mean he makes flowers? Flowers grow out of the earth and all by themselves. Why would anyone need to make flowers? They are not the creation of bees. What sort of flower could a bee make except a sorry imitation, without pollen or anything of value?
And yet it was true. The strange bee was actually making flowers, or at least something that looked like flowers. And they grew, changed shape and color, just like real flowers. Towards the end of the spring, and not very far into summer, he had produced a fairly large patch of flowers, almost as beautiful as real flowers, but different, and somehow enchanting. Just when the designers were getting ready to take action, it was noticed that production was gradually increasing. Soon it was higher than anticipated, and there was more honey than anyone could remember. The designers could not understand it. The worker bees were spending less time working, and yet they made more honey, a golden and deep, rich flow of it. And so they too began to spend time watching the strange bee, also walking and flying through the garden of enchanted flowers. The worker bees marveled at how hard the strange bee sometimes worked. Actually, he worked very erratically. Most times he did nothing at all, or whatever pleased him at the moment. Obviously, he was not storing up honey for the winter, so he would surely die. He would be a one-summer bee, not a 5 or 6 summer bee as some of the oldest. Apparently, he was not even going to try for a second summer. It was obvious he was damaged, but still very intriguing. The strange bee only worked on the very hottest and most humid days, when the thunderstorms were building throughout the afternoon. During the hot parts of the day, he would mold wax into the outlines of flowers. The rain would cool and solidify the stalks and petals. Just as the storm was ending, when the rainbow formed and the clouds were dispersing, the rays of the sun filtered through the clouds in many colors and patterns. Dark rays through the center of thick clouds, white, silvery rays through the cloud linings, golden and red rays directly from the sun, and every color of the rainbow are reflected and augmented from 1,000 different angles. The bee would hover over the wax stalks and adjust his wings at just the right angle. He could tell when he felt the warm glow in the center of his wings. As the rays were redirected through his wings, he started to move his legs, first with effort, then faster and faster, eventually moving of their own accord, and he merely watched the weaving of colors and patterns into flowers. Occasionally, he expended a small amount of effort to accomplish a specific effect, but mostly he liked to observe and to be surprised by the result. During these times, he would work so fast and with no resting time. He never told anyone that his wings never even got tired. In fact, they felt better when he was done than when he had started. His legs did get achy, but it was a nice ache and only made it more pleasant to go to sleep at night. Eventually, the designers began to see a place in their plans for the strange bee. These so-called flowers were of no use in themselves, but somehow they did result in increased production. Who cared how? The thing to do was to bring the new bee into the hive, assign him a place structure, and organize his efforts in concert with the already existing designs and plans. And so they did. The strange bee was assigned a cell and given a schedule. Although he was not expected to carry pollen and produce honey, he was expected to produce flowers throughout the workday. If some flowers meant increased productivity, obviously more flowers would mean more productivity and more honey. They already had a thick and deep pool of it, but they still wanted more. He didn't complain too much. The cell was warmed from the body heat of the bees immediately above, below, and to either side of him. He did like the company, and it was nice not to be alone all the time. However, as it happened, he was not able to produce as many flowers. They could not be formed as easily or as well in the cool of the morning. So, when the thunderstorms came and it was time to weave in the colors, he was often exhausted and did a poor job. Although he was often shy about adding many of his own ideas, he now added none. He simply didn't have any. The workers didn't bother to visit the new groves, all laid out in rows and with a specific plan. They preferred the old ones, and there was no increase in productivity. The flow of honey remained as before. The designers were quick to recognize this, so they assigned him a partial quota of pollen gathering and honey production instead. The new bee did complain about this. He hated it and protested loudly. So loudly that in order to set an example, it became necessary to bring him before the queen. She looked at him without very much interest. They spoke back and forth, and they did not interrupt one another.
If you are going to live here, strange bee, it is only fair that you carry your share of the load and without complaint, as the other workers do.
I understand that. But why work from sun up to sun down? Why is it possible to never stop?
The winter always comes, and no one can ever know how long or hard it will be. The question is never whether or not bees will die, but how many. And so, we can never work long enough or hard enough. You have been granted special favors because, well, we do not understand all of it, but your attitude, as of late, has created problems and some amount of chaos. You must understand that we cannot have that.
If bees will always die, then why work so hard to prevent it? And what of the years when there is a surplus?
If there is a surplus, then we are able to expand further into the meadow and past the trees and into another meadow.
How many meadows do you wish to dominate?
Where do you do all of them? That is the law of every hive. Each tries to dominate all of them. None succeed, but at least everyone keeps busy and not so many die in the winter.
Well, it's a bad law. It needs to be changed.
Wherever it came from, little bee, it came down long before you showed up. And if a law could be changed by any bee who thought as much of himself as you do, what sort of law would that be?
To this, the strange bee had no answer. So he fulfilled his quota, except he was excused on the hot, humid days when the thunderclouds were building up. Sometimes he was allowed to stay out and watch the dancing of the rays as they bounced off the moon in the night sky. He captured and saved more colors from being used the next day. He was surprised and pleased with the new flowers he was making. They were every bit as beautiful as the real flowers, although more haunting and enchanting. However, he was still convinced that he would do even better with no demands on his time, and so, in the early part of autumn, he left. He simply walked out and then flew off by himself. The strange bee spent the rest of the autumn making one last flower.
I will be a one summer bee. What use are the other summers if they are to be used up with work anyway?
This flower had thicker sides and a rather large cave on the inside. There were no thunderstorms in the fall, only brief flashes of orange and red light in the evening, just before the autumn dark. He could capture only a small amount of warmth and color each evening, and on many evenings, none at all. He would work late and capture the cooler colors, dark blue, silvery white, and black and gray, as he had learned to do in the summer. When the orange autumn dark gave way to the gray of winter, not knowing whether he had succeeded or not, he crawled inside. He laid down to sleep. He wondered if he would ever wake again. Most of the workers made it through the winter, but they were very sad to start their labors in the meadow where all the enchanted flowers had now died. They were all withered and the same color as dead grass. Yet, on one of the first spring days, late in the evening, they saw a small disturbance on the far edge of the meadow, against the background of the surrounding trees. Small flashes of blue and yellow, sometimes green and sometimes crimson, deep and rich. The end.